Welcome back. In February, we reported on Operation Mushtarak in Afghanistan, the U.S.-led military offensive that saw not only the biggest combat push since 2001, but also ramped up media management by international forces there. A vital element of the Mushtarak media strategy was the embed program. Embedding journalists within military units has, during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, become standard operating procedure. And more of the coverage that we're seeing, hearing, and reading from the two war zones comes from embedded journalists. But there are problems when reporters live with the militaries they cover and seldom venture outside those units to report on the rest of the story. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on embeds, the advantages, the pitfalls, and the journalists who take issue with this kind of reporting.
Tonight, Nick Schifrin travels with the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan to one of the most remote.
In November last year, the average was 69.
The military believe around 400 to 1,000 heart.
3 months later, in February this year, the number had jumped to 84.
This will be the 7th spring offensive since this long, sometimes.
Halfway through May, and the average number of journalists embedded with international forces in Afghanistan is 73. More and more, the story of the war in Afghanistan is being told by journalists on the road with military units.
Now, Aratia Albawi and photographer Mary Rogers have been embedded with US Marines in the...
Most journalists who cover the conflict in Afghanistan cover it embedded with coalition NATO military troops.
The military want to win the war. There's no question about it. The media and information and propaganda are all part of the conflict.
The entire valley.
And in this conflict, reporting from the battlefield means you have to be embedded.
And US troops have captured this spot, giving them...
For the militaries involved, embeds provide a large measure of control over the media message.
NBC's Richard Engel is embedded with U.S. troops in Afghanistan's Kunar province.
For reporters and news organizations, trading some of their editorial independence means they get two things in return: security and pictures.
The embed program is at heart a good thing. It gives an opportunity for journalists to go to this very, in many ways, confusing, scattered war.
How bad is this area?
And cover it close up.
The pictures from embeds are inclined to be sort of like nothing we've managed as journalists, as video journalists, to get for decades.
Clear as many compounds as possible.
So in a sense, they've got an incredible pull to broadcasters because you do get amazing pictures of fighting and war.
But what the pictures don't show is the other side of the war. The vast majority of the footage is of guns being fired. What embeds don't provide is images of where the bombs and bullets land.
As a journalist who's been embedded multiple times, but also lived in Afghanistan just as a journalist, the perspectives are very, very different. When you're embedded, you're basically in this bubble. The thing that's really missing is the Afghan perspective.
The core problem with embedded journalism in Afghanistan, and anywhere for that matter, is that the journalists naturally identify with who you're with.
Come on in, Captain Bruley.
Talk about not having objectivity or not having separation. Being with men and women whose lives are at stake forges an identity where you and they are one and the same. And what we need our journalists to do is the opposite of embed, is to be one step removed so they can ask the hard questions.
For reporters who buck the control of the military, the implications are often serious.
There is a problem with the embed program, and that has to do with the way that the military shapes coverage. If the military doesn't like the story, doesn't like the images that you took, doesn't like the way you phrased certain things or the quotes that you selected from soldiers, they can terminate your embed immediately. The termination is irrevocable and unappealable.
In the last 36 hours alone,
the reason that I embed much less now is because I've been blacklisted. Quite simply, there was one episode in Helmand where I ended up having an argument with my minder, with my censor, over whether or not I could show a video clip which showed a British soldier shooting a machine gun without his body armour. Now, this had nothing to do with operational security. It was purely to do with domestic British political concerns because there was a big debate raging over soldiers' welfare. And I was told that if I didn't remove that clip, if I didn't swap it for something else, then I would never get another embed in Helmand.
For the military, the stakes are too high to risk unfavorable news reports from embedded correspondents. Up until last year, the US military hired a communications consulting firm called Rendon Group to vet journalists before they would allow them to be embedded. PJ Tobiah actually saw the report Rendon wrote about him.
My Rendon report was sort of like perusing the diary of my stalker. They had found pretty much everything I've written for the last 5 years or so, including personal interviews like this one I'm doing right now with you. It was a little creepy, I guess, and then they rate the journalists.
In August of 2009, Tobiah published his Rendon report on his blog. Shortly thereafter, the company lost its contract with the US military. Those who take issue with the embed program aren't opposed only to the monitoring and control of correspondence. News organizations come under fire as well for allowing so much of their coverage to come from embeds. Because as an April report by Jerome Starkey in the Times of London showed, the unembedded perspective is a vital counterpoint to the military-approved message.
For the first time, U.S. and NATO officials admit that a February raid by U.S. Special Operations troops in Afghanistan went very, very wrong.
There was a night raid in this place called Khataba in eastern Afghanistan, and NATO issued a statement saying that their force found the bodies of 3 women tied up, gagged and killed.
And now for the really horrible twist. The Times of London is reporting that not only did U.S. Special Operations forces kill these women, but they may have also tried to cover up that fact.
The family claim that the U.S. forces dug the bullets out of the dead bodies of the victims. U.S. forces insist there is no evidence to corroborate any claims of a cover-up.
The report that Jerome Starkey ran in the Times of London about the NATO cover-up never would have happened. That story never would have happened from an embedded reporter. For one very important reason, the soldiers who carried out that night raid were special forces operators. One of the hard and fast rules of embedding, in fact it's in a contract that you sign before you're embedded, is that you will not take pictures of special forces personnel. So that story never would have been found by an embedded reporter because an embedded reporter never would have been embedded with a special forces unit.
And now that the operation started, it's taken...
And with stories like the one he broke about the NATO cover-up, Jerome Starkey is unlikely to get an embed anytime soon. Because when it comes to the military managing the message, it's not just about who they take with them, but who they leave behind. The pictures that don't get shot, the stories that go untold.
More Global Village Voices now on the pluses and minuses of embedded war reporting.
Embedded reporting is a viable option in war zones when independent reporting is impossible or too dangerous, but the intrinsic objectivity of a journalist is compromised.
We need to have, especially in Afghanistan, reporters on the ground and being able to give us a sense of what Afghans themselves are thinking.
Embedding, or the buddy system for journalists, creates a feeling of kinship between reporters and soldiers, but most important, no reporter wants to be around a bunch of guys with guns after he or she has filed a bad report.
Finally, we featured videos before on parkour, or free running. Parkour came out of Paris in the late 1990s. It's an urban art form that takes the athleticism of gymnastics and applies it to the inner city. Its practitioners can turn any urban space into a personal playground. Damien Walters is one of the best in the business. He's British, but he took this French invention, added his own touches, and has since carved out a career in Hollywood as a stuntman. His latest video, which shows him on the street and in the gym working on his mind-blowing moves, is racking up the hits on the web, so we've made it our video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.